Well, a friend of mine is retiring early, and they asked me, what's the best deal out there that there is on a GPU? And that spawned a conversation beyond just that. But let's take a look at what happens when I'm spending someone else's money. I mean, I actually wasn't going to make a video, but I had a lot of fun living vicariously through through their wonder. So I'll share what we did because it was kind of a lot of fun. Okay, so the budget. The budget is the big question, right? Because, what do you want to spend? Well, he said he'd already been looking at, $2,000 GPUs like the 3090 and the 3090 Ti. And, we sort of joked, when did graphics cards get so expensive? I mean, in the old days with like the Voodoo 2, it wasn't really super expensive. So, yeah, we sort of joked about that. When you see a $5,000 gaming computer, though, it really does soften you up to the idea of a $2,000 gaming computer, which in a lot of cases is 87% as good as the $5,000 gaming computer. So, you gotta find, what's the reasonable deal? Okay. So you're shopping for something high end, but are you sane? That's what I asked. So, and he's also planning to do contract jobs on the side and that kind of thing. So he's gonna have other income. It's not like this has to last 30 years or 40 years or 50 years, depending on how long he's planning to live. And, it's like, there's time now. There's finally time. There's an aspect of that where you just want to get something really good. And I ask, okay, well, what about your other stuff? Your monitor. What do you got for a monitor? It's like, oh, I've got a 4K monitor. Don't worry about that. But the lulls on that was yet to come. Remember that. Okay, what are you going to play? Look, if you're going to play old games, you can use an old GPU. And then when you run out of old games, then you can buy whatever GPU is current. We're in an age where generation on generation, we see gains that are pretty significant from card to card. And, okay, well, there's a gotcha with that, but we'll come back to that. I mean, crypto madness aside, $500 spent tomorrow on a graphics card is almost certainly better than $500 spent today. And on a long enough time scale, that's universally true. It just makes sense to do that. Like I say, cryptocurrency is making that really true now, where that was less true a little while ago. And we're in an age when GPUs are hot, and Player 3, Intel, maybe is entering the game. So what did I pick? I picked the ASRock Formula 6950 XT at around $1,100 right now. This is still pretty much the only high-end option, because the other high-end options are selling over MSRP. And so we bought it. The 6950 XT is a modest bump in performance over the 6900 XT, and because I was so happy with the 6900 XT, it's why we went with the 6950. Remember this? I reviewed this from ASRock. This one, not from ASRock. And since the 6900 XT launched, I've been using it, and the driver improvements alone have added more than 10% performance to most of the games. Ray tracing has improved. Everything is better. It's great. And I get it. I get where AMD is going. I mean, a bad software experience can ruin what is otherwise top-shelf hardware. And AMD has done more to improve their software in the last 12 months. And I'm not just talking about the baseline driver stuff. I'm talking about their tech for upscaling and visual fidelity and improvements that gamers everywhere can experience. But they're doing a lot of legwork for the game developers as well. But you know what else was about to ruin our day? The old 06X55C. That's a 4K 30Hz monitor from Dell. 4K 30Hz? You didn't even know that was a problem until it was a problem. I mean, it was one of the most expensive high-end 4K monitors that ever existed for 4K, and it's got a razor-sharp picture and blah, 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 but no. This ain't happening. Only 30 hertz is a horror show. So, yeah, he's going to use the money that he saved on his GPU to get this. This is a Gigabyte M32U. This is a 32-inch 4K monitor, and this makes sense. This makes sense for 4K gaming. 4K, 144 hertz, IPS, crystal clear display. This is why the 6950X makes sense. This is what it was designed for. And I started the fun with Quake 2 ray tracing. This was pretty much the first game to get Vulkan ray tracing support on AMD. And why? Because it's the same software philosophy. It's open. Developers can implement it. Quake 2 is so old, the engine is basically open source. And the difference between, Quake and Quake 2 and something else, well, I mean, just look at this. Look at the wonder of this. Playing this game with just better software is a transformative visual experience. It is so good with dynamic lighting that it's a wondrous experience, especially if you've played the older version. We also took a look at the Odyssey G9 Neo as maybe another monitor, and he really liked the 5K resolution a lot, and of course, the OC formula handled it like a champ. Yeah, it's really inside your brain when you're playing, because all you see is monitor. But with the firmware issues and the other bugs, and not every game is going to support this just absolutely, completely absurd widescreen resolution, we ultimately decided against the G9 Neo. So, of course, our plucky little system with the 6950 is doing an amazing job. You can hear it in the background. It's pushing the pixels at many, many FPS. Easily 160 FPS. I've got the VSync cap on. This thing set for 160 instead of 240 because I'm a crazy person. But yeah, works great. Samsung's also exiting the display business. And we also found all the bugs in the firmware from the other stuff that we did. So we ultimately noped out on that monitor. I mean, it is a nice monitor. And once you, plug it into your brain, because that's what it feels like when you use your monitor, is that you're just, putting on Geordi's visor from Star Trek and then you're there. We also considered the LG 43-inch OLED. 120 hertz. It's HDMI only, though, which is why it sucks. And the HDMI spec, the people that are responsible for HDMI 2.1 is not an open spec. Now, I still use LG, my LG OLED monitor with Megadesk. And, of course, the ASRock formula is no slouch on that system either. I mean, it's a big, big card. It's got big, big card energy, which is what you need. But this was just right. Great color accuracy, IPS. And I have to say, it was a lot of fun living vicariously, experiencing someone else's wonder, playing all these games at over 100 FPS, but also on a good display. If we side-by-side Quake 2 with Doom Eternal, I mean, they're related, they're cousins. You might not know this, but Quake 2 was designed for gaming at a resolution of 320 by 240, 30 FPS. But if you had a crazy fire-breathing machine, you could maybe run it at a resolution of 640 by 480. But not long after Quake 2 launched, it did support even higher resolutions, 1024 by 768. It's magical. Fast forward to today. Now we regularly game at 4K and even beyond. I mean, the 8K gaming demos aren't that far behind us. Playing games like Horizon Zero Dawn, I'm constantly surprised at how photorealistic things in that game are, and more modern games in the Unreal Engine. If we speak about just texture resolution and frame rate and pixel fill rate and that sort of thing, I'm not sure that it's possible for us to go as far with visual fidelity as we've already come in the future. I mean, think about that for a second. How far we've got to go is closer than how far we've already come. When you're looking at all 12 polygons in a model, a 3D model in an older game like Quake 2, or even low poly Lara Croft in Tomb Raider, it'll never be as much of a visual fidelity leap from where we are today as it was from where we were then, with whatever's coming in the future. I mean, ray tracing. Look at ray tracing. That's the first evidence of that. Ray tracing is simulating light. We're doing that basically in real time now, which is a fundamentally different approach than we've done in the past. And we've used that as a yardstick to measure the performance difference with different video cards, different vendors. The lighting in Quake 2, it had to be baked into the textures, because that's just the only way until recently. But that's what I mean. When we look at the future, or we try to imagine what the future is going to be like, we're basically already there with photorealistic games. Even Shadow of the Tomb Raider, that's kind of an old game. If we look at that compared with Horizon Zero Dawn, the character models, the level of detail, it's a pretty big difference in Horizon Zero Dawn. There's a lot more visual fidelity in that than Shadow of the Tomb Raider. But it's a lot harder to immediately notice that level of fidelity. Now, adding new technologies like ray tracing and other, probably, physics was added to games, physics acceleration, and now we don't really even hear about it. It will be like that with ray tracing. It'll probably be like that with other gaming technologies. But that's what I mean when I say that we've probably already come farther in terms of visual fidelity than, until we get to holodeck level technology, the fruit is not going to be quite as low hanging. When you break that down in terms of video card specification, we're talking about pixel fill rate and frame rates per second, shaders, rasterizers. We'll talk about variable rate shading, where you can shave a few milliseconds off of a render. And all of this sort of plays into software upscaling. We're not really rendering 4K worth of pixels anymore. We're not really rendering 8K worth of pixels anymore. Certainly with ray tracing, we're not ray tracing that full scene. We're only ray tracing a select little bit of it, and then we're using software to upscale that and fill in the details. The next generation of card and the next generation of card and the next generation of card are only going to improve on these themes. It is not a dramatic improvement in terms of just the raw pixel fill rate. And I can prove it. If you look at 1080p gaming for this latest generation of cards, everybody I think would agree that the last few generations of video cards from the major players in the market have been head and shoulders improvements over prior generation products. Dramatic improvements, breathtaking improvements. But we look at the 1080p frame rate gaming, and the performance improvement is not as pronounced as 1440p, as pronounced as 4K. And the reason for that is because the bottlenecks exist elsewhere. There's things in the game engine, things to do with the texture fill rate, things that have to do with memory bandwidth when you're pushing 200-300 FPS, but also the visual fidelity, like what you as a gamer experience. Moving from 30 to 60 FPS is night and day. Moving from 60 FPS to 120 FPS, that's pretty big. That's another doubling, and you can definitely feel that. Moving from 120 FPS to 240 FPS, you're going to notice that a lot more on the display technology side than you are on the GPU side. The GPU stuff required to do that is going to have more to do with upscaling than it is actually filling the pixels in a traditional rasterized pipeline kind of a way. That's why the software is so important, and that's why having an open platform, I think, is going to be critically important for the future of gaming if you don't want to be locked into just one choice. I mean, this is running at 1080p at 174 FPS. With OBS running in the background. I mean, when you look at the little details in Horizon Zero Dawn, the foliage, the shadows, everything that's going on in the background, the particle effects, water effects, the different things in the game, there's different engine parts that are handling this. Physics, ray tracing. Ray tracing is just the new hotness right now. You don't hear anything about physics acceleration, but it's there. Remember when Hairworks was a thing and it was added to game engines, and if it didn't have Hairworks then it wouldn't run well? We've got better than Hairworks now, done a different way, that's universally available depending on what the game is. I mean, games are to the point where the actors that are doing the voice stuff, it's motion capture and they're reproducing the muscles of their face digitally and rendering that in real time depending on whatever your hardware is. There was a time these would be pre-rendered cutscenes, and it would take weeks to render them on supercomputers, and then it would just play back the movie. That's not really the case anymore. Well, it depends on the game, but in this case. So for the highest end gaming, the fastest card in the market, there's really only one choice, and it didn't cost $2,000. This is the one that I picked. And I really like how far we've come in general since gaming on, Quake 2 and that sort of thing. Oh, and the 6900 and the 6950, they can also do ROCm for machine learning. Mark and I are working on a guide for that on the Level 1 forums, but that's a video for another day. In fact, the rest of the build and all the other details that go into this maybe is a video for another day, but I just wanted to share because, seeing Quake 2 ray traced, I know that's old news. That's from 2020. That's like 2 years. But going from that to everything else and sort of re-experiencing some of your old favorites or even just your favorites from last year with a monster GPU upgrade kind of is a lot of fun. So if you've got, a 5-year-old GPU, now might be the time. And with the scalpers pricing basically gone, yeah, I know there's a new generation of GPUs coming at some point in the next 6 to 8 months, maybe sooner, maybe farther. We don't know. But yeah, I don't know. It's crazy how far we've come from the olden days. And it should be plain to see that the increase in visual fidelity over the next couple of years is not going to rival what we have already seen. It's going to be changes in the technology. Ray tracing or Ray Tracing 2.0 is going to be the new hot thing, not pushing pixels. And that, I think, is something interesting not a lot of people are talking about. And in the time since I put this video together, AMD's offering a deal to sweeten the pot. They're giving away up to 3 free games. Be sure to check that out. There's a link to that below. But yeah, if you pick up a brand new graphics card from AMD, you might get one of 3 or up to 3 AAA games, depending on which model you get. Now, the less expensive models, you don't get 3 games, but check that out. It's pretty awesome. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1. If you want to discuss, we can hang out on the Level 1 forums, chat, screenshots, fun stuff. All right, I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.